This is streaming test number 2 and the last one before we try and go live on Monday. So what I'm just going to do is try to stream for a little bit longer this time, and I'm going to install a virtual machine that we can use for our training. So first things first, I've installed Oracle VirtualBox, which is a free virtual machine manager, which is cross-platform, so you can install it for Windows as well as Mac OS, which is what I'm using here. And what I'm going to do is install a Linux virtual machine in VirtualBox that we can then use for a lot of the things that we're going to do over the next few weeks using command line Linux. So I've got VirtualBox running here, and at the moment we have no virtual machines installed, so we need to add a new machine. So I'm going to click on new. Okay, so this pops up this dialog box. We're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it COVID training, which is as good a name as any. I'm going to store it in this VirtualBox VM's directory in my home directory, which is fine. It doesn't really matter where it goes, to be honest. Okay, so type, it's going to be a Linux virtual machine, and it's going to be an Ubuntu 64-bit image that I have downloaded. So if you want to follow along, you're also going to need to get a similar image. In this case, I think Ubuntu is probably a good bet. Okay, so this is going to create an empty machine. So essentially this is going to give us a hard drive, which will have nothing installed on it to begin with. We've just told it what type of operating system we're going to install on it, and then we'll install that operating system, and we'll try to give it access to our local disk on in this case on my Mac laptop as well. Okay, so I don't know why that's happened. Oh yes, I do. Okay, it's because I've had that already, so that's fine. In that case, let's just drag a Finder window in, and we'll go to my home directory where we've got VirtualBox VMs, and because I already had one called that, it's still there, so we need to delete that. So I'm going to move that to the bin. There we are, that's gone. So now we can try again, and this time it should work. Right, fine, good. So that's created the beginnings of the virtual machine. What we now need to do is tell it how big we want the RAM to be. So my laptop has 16 gigs of RAM, so that's the maximum that I can give it. That's not terribly sensible, because then it would steal all of the resources of my machine. The default is to give it a gigabyte of RAM. I'm actually going to give it 4, so I'm going to slide this up until it gets to 4096, which should be enough for a lot of the tasks that we need to do without it taking over my whole laptop while I'm running it. So that should create a 4 gig of RAM virtual machine. We also want to give it a virtual hard disk. I'm only going to run the operating system on the hard disk, so it doesn't need to be big. So it's just going to be 10 gigabytes. I'm going to accept the default here and create a 10 gigabyte virtual hard drive. So that's going to be created, just leaving that at the defaults. And again, I don't need this to be portable. I'm just only ever going to run it within VirtualBox. So accepting the default on this screen is fine. A VirtualBox disk image is absolutely fine for the type of disk that you want. If you wanted to run it in other virtual machine supervisor software, then you might need to change that, but there's no reason to for these tutorials. And finally, this option, I think this is finally, I might be wrong. So this option lets us decide whether we're just going to give all of that 10 gig as a fixed size on the disk from the beginning, or whether we're going to allocate it as we use it. I'm just going to leave that as dynamically allocated. It might be a little bit slower, but most of the time it's not going to matter, and we're not going to be touch slider to change that if should I want to, or I can select this and change the numbers. I'm going to leave it at 10 gig. just so we've got a decent sized virtual drive. So that will create that machine. So there we go, and that's created the machine. At the moment, there's nothing installed on this, although we've told it it's going to be an Ubuntu virtual machine. There's nothing installed here. So if I start the machine, it's going to tell me, I'm just going to drag it into the right place so you can see it. It's going to ask me, okay, so I've got a selection of various disk images here that I can run to install from. I've got an Ubuntu server image and the guest editions of VirtualBox. I don't want either of those things. I want my new Ubuntu desktop image that I downloaded before I started this stream. So I'm going to select that. So that's going to start, and it's going to complain that there's no system found, no bootable medium found, system halted, because it hasn't got anything hasn't got an operating system to run off. So I'm going to close that. I'm just going to power off the machine. Okay, so that's going to go away in just a second, and then I'm going to, in the settings of the virtual machine here, I'm going to add something into the optical drive. Okay, so this is a virtual optical drive, and I'm going to give it a virtual CD effectively. So I've downloaded from the Ubuntu website, which is I think ubuntu.org, but I will check. So from the Ubuntu website, I have downloaded a disk image. I'm just checking the web address for Ubuntu. But anyway, I've downloaded a disk image which I can find in my downloads folder here. You can't see that. Oh, never mind. Right, okay. This is the way that these things are going to go for a while until I get used to this. Right, so I'm going to click on there, and I'm going to say choose a disk file, because I've got the disk file downloaded on my hard drive. So I'm going to click that, and up pops a dialog with my downloads folder, and in here I've got an Ubuntu disk image which I've downloaded this morning. So we scroll down, you'll find I've got two here. I've got Ubuntu desktop, which I downloaded this morning, today, 9:37, and then Ubuntu server, which I downloaded earlier in the week. So we're going to install Ubuntu desktop to give us a nice graphical user interface should we require it. So that's gone into my optical drive. So that's a virtual CD-ROM drive effectively, with a virtual CD-ROM in it. And now if I click start, because of the settings of my machine, the boot order, which you can see here, says floppy optical hard disk, so it will boot from that optical drive before it tries to boot from the hard disk. So if we start now, this VM will now run that disk image, which is what's happening here. So it's running the Ubuntu installer. So you can see that Ubuntu has started up running from the optical drive. Okay. You can download Ubuntu desktop from top, which I will just make a little bit bigger. There we are. Right, okay, so our little CD is run, and it's giving us two options. We can either try Ubuntu and run it from that CD, or we can install Ubuntu onto our hard drive. So we're going to install Ubuntu. So we're going to click that button, and we're basically, for most of this, we're just going to accept the defaults that it gives us. Except because I'm in the UK, I'm going to tell it that. So I'm going to say I've got a UK keyboard layout, and it's a standard UK keyboard. So off we go, and then we're going to continue. So that's the keyboard. We're just going to do a normal installation, which will come with all of the things that you would normally expect. Actually, yeah, we'll stick with the normal installation. Come with all of the things you would normally expect from a normal operating system. Ubuntu is a really mature operating system. It's been around for the best part of 20 years now. So it's a really kind of well tested and mature Linux operating system. We'll get everything up to date. We'll download the updates while we're installing Ubuntu, just to make sure we've got all the latest security updates and everything. So continue on that. Okay, there we go. So erase disk and install Ubuntu. That's fine. That's what we want to do, because there's nothing on the disk anyway. So that's absolutely perfectly fine as a thing to do. Okay. Just continue, accept the defaults here. It's going to create a single disk partition that occupies the whole of the disk. Tell it where we are in the world. I'm not in London, but it's close enough. Okay, so who am I? So I am Simon Gockel. My computer's name is COVID Training. My username, Simon, is fine, and I'm just going to pick a password here. Okay, it's a VM, so when it's not running, it's not accessible to anybody. So you don't need to worry too much about scary long passwords here. Okay, continue. Okay, so hopefully now this is going to install. Well, it is installing. So it's copying the files onto the hard drive, setting everything up. I'm installing, by the way, Ubuntu, what's called Ubuntu 18.04, which is their long-term support release. So, as the name suggests, it was released in April 2018. And it's what's called their long-term support release, or LTS release, which means that it gets security updates for 5 years. Ubuntu release an LTS every 2 years, so the next one is due in April this year, although obviously with current events, who knows whether that is actually what is going to happen or not. But I find it useful to stick with the long-term support releases, because otherwise you're having to update your operating system every 6 months, because the non-long-term support releases, which come out every 6 months, are only supported with security updates for 9 months. So you need to keep updating the latest version, and that can get a little bit tedious. Obviously, Ubuntu Desktop is, as the name suggests, is a desktop operating system, so it comes with all of these features that you would expect from a desktop operating system, and which is what it's advertising to me while it's doing the installation here. Once this has installed, what I would like to be able to do is to give my virtual machine access to my to the hard drive of my laptop. I've got a little folder for sharing files between the two that I've already set up, and I want to make sure that my virtual machine can access those files on my current machine. To be able to do that, we have to install something called the VirtualBox VM Guest Editions, which allows the VM to act. Think what I might have to do is make that the topic of another video, because it looks like this installation is going to take a little while, and I don't want to mug to the camera effectively for ages and ages, although it seems to be going relatively quickly. I'll give this another couple of minutes, and if it doesn't install in a couple of minutes, I'm going to sign off, and I'll come back later, and we'll install the guest editions then. I think that might be the best thing to do, because otherwise I'm going to be filling desperately for a very long time, which none of you want to hear. Not that there's anybody watching at this point, but okay, so with that, I'm going to sign off this live stream now, and I will come back when the VM has installed, maybe a little bit later today, and talk through installing the guest editions then. Okay, so thanks for watching if you're watching, and come back later.